But the food I really want to focus on the most that we're seeing interesting evidence with is Sacha Inchi. I've talked about Sacha Inchi seeds before. They taste like a nut, but technically they're a seed. I want to break down some of the science behind it. There's a study that was published in the journal Food Science and Agriculture. It looked at Sacha Inchi protein hydrolysates, because Sacha Inchi happens to be the highest protein seed that you're going to find. And they found 10 peptides in this simple protein that inhibited DPP4. So they're like, okay, well, this is interesting. So it had an ability, which again, Sacha Inchi has 0 net carbs because every single carbohydrate is a fiber. So 0 net carbs. So it means all the fiber that is in Sacha Inchi is going to have a more profound GLP-1 effect because DPP4 is also inhibited. So the GLP-1 that is produced is theoretically going to last longer, thereby giving a more stronger effect on satiety. When you're looking at most nuts and seeds, they're usually very much so skewed towards an omega-6 content, which is not the end of the world. But when you look at alpha-linoleic acid, most nuts and seeds have a very small amount of it, whereas Sacha Inchi has a quite significant amount of it. There's a study looking at like fat oxidation in general. So a study in Journal of Functional Foods was looking at Sacha Inchi oil specifically, found that Sacha Inchi oil had a pretty big impact on fatty acid oxidation. So it actually increased the amount of fat that could be oxidized. It does this because it increases what is called adiponectin. Now, adiponectin is a hormone that is associated with our adipose tissue in a good way because it increases fatty acid oxidation, but does that by increasing what's called AMPK. So in simple terms, it kind of puts the body into a tilted towards a deficit, so it's more likely to oxidize fats. The other thing that we have to look at is because Sacha Inchi has such an insanely high amount of alpha-linoleic acid, an omega-3, it has an ability to inhibit what's called fatty acid synthase. So it can slow down the formation of newer fat, which is pretty interesting just from a body composition standpoint. If a food is satiating, it's probably because you're getting this like prolonged effect in digestion, GLP-1, all this stuff. So we have to pay attention to that. But I also want to pivot over to the insulin resistance piece because this all ties together. There was a study published in the journal Traditional and Complementary Medicine. Now this is a rodent model study, but it was done with Sacha Inchi oil, and it was pretty interesting. They used extra virgin Sacha Inchi oil or an anti-diabetic medication in these rats where they induced type 2 diabetes. So they made these rats diabetic. What they found is that the Sacha Inchi oil reduced glucose, reduced the response to sugar. It also improved pancreatic beta cell function and restored insulin levels. Pretty interesting because these parallel what GLP-1 receptor agonists will typically do. But you're doing it with a food. That's pretty phenomenal.